The Battle of the Alamo was fought in 1836 during the Texas Revolution. In the early 1820s, to populate the north of their country, the Mexican government allowed Americans to move into Texas. With cheap land and tariff exemptions, Americans in Texas quickly outnumbered Mexicans. By 1830, Mexico outlawed further immigration from the United States and introduced new taxes, angering the Texans. In 1833, General Santa Anna was elected as Mexican president, and a petition was sent to him with a series of Texan requests. Some were granted, but the appeal of separate statehood for Texas was rejected. After taking power, Santa Anna brought in laws making himself dictator. To enforce tax laws and keep authority, 500 Mexican soldiers were sent to Texas, but they soon clashed with Texan settlers. After a string of defeats and besieged in San Antonio, the Mexican forces surrendered. Determined to crush the rebellion and regain control of Texas, Santa Anna led an army across the Rio Grande and targeted a former Mexican garrison, now occupied by Texans, known as the Alamo. On the day of the battle, the Texans, commanded by Colonel Travis, had 189 men. The Mexicans, led by General Santa Anna, had around 4,000. The battle took place over 13 days and began on the 23rd of February, when over 1,500 Mexican soldiers appeared and took position around the Alamo. They also deployed artillery to target the Alamo walls, although the cannon were placed too far away to cause serious damage. Upon the arrival of further Mexican soldiers, Colonel Travis saw he was greatly outnumbered and sent requests for reinforcements. On the third day of the siege, about 300 Mexicans entered a small village close to the Alamo in order to place artillery at a closer range. Texan soldiers at the southern and western walls of the fort began firing on them. The Mexicans took cover in the village, and a short battle between the two sides began. After suffering losses, the Mexicans retreated. Texan soldiers burned the village to prevent it being used again. Artillery was persistently fired at the Alamo, but no casualties were suffered by the Texans. On the 8th day, 32 men arrived as reinforcements. The Texans now had a force of just under 200 soldiers. On day 10, the Mexicans also received reinforcements of 1,000 men. Santa Anna's force now numbered over 4,000. The Mexicans moved artillery close to the north wall and began a sustained attack against that position. For the next 2 days, the bombardment against the fort was intensified, but on the afternoon of day 12, the cannon ceased firing, and that night, positions were taken to storm the fort. Santa Anna ordered 4 columns to simultaneously attack the Alamo. 400 men at the north wall, 500 at the west, 300 at the east wall, and about 100 at the south. 400 were in reserve, along with a group of cavalry to prevent any attempt at escape. At 5 a.m. the attack began. Although caught by surprise, the Texans took up defensive positions. Cannons at the Alamo's north wall killed many on the Mexican front line, and further casualties were caused by Texan rifles. The attack on the west wall was also being opposed by Texan cannon fire. Suffering heavy losses, the Mexicans at the north and west began to fall back. Artillery placed in the chapel stalled the attack at the east, and to avoid further losses, their formation began to swerve to the right. Unable to break down the defence of the south wall, the majority of Mexicans changed course to target the southwest corner. The retreating soldiers were pushed forward again, and as they advanced to the north wall, they were joined by the attacking columns of the east and the west, both having to swing round to avoid taking further losses. All 3 columns took cover at the base of the north wall, out of reach of the Texan cannons. They were joined by some of the reserve column sent in by Santa Anna. With the majority of Mexicans in one location, many Texans posted at the south left their position to reinforce the north. But with overwhelming numbers, the Mexicans were able to scale the wall. Some defenders were killed, and others fell back to the main plaza as soldiers streamed over the wall. With limited resistance at the south and many Mexicans out of reach of the Texan cannon, a renewed attack was able to force its way to the Alamo. With the north and south breached, the west wall was attacked once more, and against minimal opposition, the Mexicans gained access from a third location. An opening in the north wall was unlocked, and Mexican soldiers flooded into the Alamo. Texans that tried to escape were killed by the waiting Mexican cavalry. The remaining Texans retreated to rooms along the walls, firing from doors and windows. Soldiers began clearing each room until they reached the chapel, where the last of the Texans remained. As the Mexicans stormed the building, they were blasted by cannon fire. but completely outnumbered, the final Alamo defenders were all killed. At the end of the battle, the Mexicans had suffered losses of around 500, but the Texans had lost all 189 men. This was a victory for the Mexicans. This setback did not stop the Texans. More volunteers joined the movement and, inspired with the phrase, "Remember the Alamo," continued their quest for an independent Texas.
This is the epic history and battle for the United States of America, a country with historical living of 245 years only. If Hellas has his Homer to sing the legendary Trojan War, Americans have John Wayne. John Wayne was born Marion Robert Morrison in May 26, 1907 to June 11, 1979, and that year I watched his last movie in a theater in Toronto, East York. He was born in Winterset, Iowa, which had then 2,956 population, southwest of Des Moines, in a county of Madison. His home address, 404 East Court Street. Today, Winterset has around 4,000 people, I guess. His roots are from Irish, Scottish, English. His grandparents settled in America before the Civil War. He is the prototype of patriotism, John Wayne. Pictures of his mom here with Robert Mitchum's mom as well, on the set of El Dorado. And here, sitting on the director's chair for the movie. The making of Alamo, it was not easy. John Wayne, since 1940, he had developed an obsession to make this story like a new Homer. And he said the following: for what it means somebody to be a patriot. For this picture, the reason he wanted to make this picture, it was his patriotism. And hear what he said: this picture is America. I hope that seeing the Battle of the Alamo will remind Americans that liberty and freedom don't come cheap. This picture, well, I guess making it has made me feel useful to my country. I think it's important that foreign countries know about this aspect of the American struggle for freedom. I hope our present generation of Americans, our children, will get a sense of our glorious past and appreciate the struggle our ancestors made for the precious freedoms which we now enjoy. and sometimes just kind of take for granted close. These words should be pinned up on school boards, on school walls, all over the country. Well, to begin with, he wanted to find a sponsor, people to invest in his picture. It was a unique story, a true story that would glorify in the future the American nation, the American country. They turned to the legendary Howard Hughes, but he was not anymore with the picture industry. Studios show interest, Universal, but first of all, many people didn't want him, they didn't let him to direct the movie. But when he turned to the major Hollywood movie studios, the Universal said that they are interested if Frank Lloyd or John Ford or Howard Hawks were directing the movie. Jack Warner in Warner Studios, a friend and businessman associate whose judgment Duke respected, pleaded with him not to do it. Warner's would be happy to co-produce the Alamo with his own company, Budjack, provided that Raoul Walsh or Mervyn LeRoy or Henry Hathaway or John Ford directing. The 20th century, with whom John Wayne had a 3-picture deal, scoffed at the idea of Wayne directing this spectacle. Paramount, where Budjack now leased quarters, would co-produce it, provided that Cecil B. DeMille or Henry Hathaway would be the director of the movie. Useless to say, John Wayne said no to anybody. He was fulfilling his dreams. The money they were asking was estimated to $6 million at that time. 1960, the movie is made, was released in the theaters, and increased slowly to $12 million. He couldn't find investors, and he invested all his savings. To a point that the movie, it was a disaster, broke him economically. Just like Steve McQueen, who was infatuated with car racing, he made that expensive movie, how can I call it, pyrotechnical movie of car racing, Le Mans. Invested all his money and he went broke as well. John Wayne was the protagonist, the main leader, director, producer. His involvement was exhaustive. He got sick, although his physique was pretty good. And here there is a reference from George Orwell, right? describing the statue of a healthy man, who calls him the one who has a very good and handsome face, sculptured by adversity, wrinkled with weather-beaten heart, eyebrows thick over narrow eyes, embedded deeply with surrounding cross batches and wrinkles, and the nose was a Roman nose. He means a Greek nose. It was a face that withered all lowliness, and what was even more complicated, all fulfillment, and like Ulysses, Odysseus, in the poem of Tennyson's, it was a face whose deep blue eyes looked beyond, looked to the next voyage, the next adventure. It is like the face of Epicurus, which Friedrich Nietzsche admired so much. The day arrived, the first day of shooting, and his son, Patrick, and his associate, Gauthier, approached him and told him to call a priest to give a prayer. But the strange thing is that the Variety magazine said never a movie picture, even those of the deepest religious productions like Ten Commandments and Ben-Hur and whatever else, never a priest gave a prayer before before moving starts rolling. That was a prototype. When grew up an agnostic, that means a man with open mind. He was growing up in the pasture under a blue sky. He was face withered, as George Orwell says, of the wind in the prairies, right, hearing the bellows and cries of the wild, the whistle or the blow of the wind on his face. He lived by nature. Couldn't be anything else. Iowa, a state that heavily voted for the present president of the United States, Donald Trump. Eventually he gave in reluctantly, and the priest was a name called Peter Rogers, and he traveled around 100 miles to come over to do it. Sitting all the crew around him before start shooting, the priest gave his prayer, and I will read it to you, because as we know, we have dealt with the prayers on that Jericho walk which took place in DC just lately. We saw the prayer as a substantial liturgical ritual for the Christians. He says, "O Almighty God, centuries ago you raised a magnificent mission, a harbor for all of peace and freedom. This was the Alamo. Today we ask your blessing, your help, and your protection as once again history is relived in this production. We ask you this so that the film of Alamo will not only be the world's outstanding production, but will also be a tribute to the spirit of the man who first built it, who lived in it, and who died in it. We ask these things in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns, world without end. Amen. Well, that prayer didn't help, as we know. But let's see what this guy has got to say about Christian prayers. The Mongol philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who is banned from universal curriculum, he has written about the prayer of the Christians in his book Human, All to Human, Volume 1, on the chapter Aristocratic Radicalism. He says, if Christianity nevertheless maintained prayer side by side with the belief in the all-wise and all-provident divine reason, a belief that makes prayer really senseless and even blasphemous, it showed here once more its admirable wisdom of the serpent. For an outspoken command, thou shalt not pray, would have led Christianity by way of boredom to the denial of Christianity. If the Christian ora et labora ora plays the role of pleasure, without ora, what could those unlucky saints who renounced labora have done but to have a chat with God, to ask Him for all kinds of pleasant things, to feel a slight amusement at one's own folly in still having any wishes at all, in spite of so excellent a Father, all that was an admirable invention for saints. Close. He means that the prayer is an invention of the saints, of the monks, of the priests, to cement the faith to Christianity. If you take it away from the ritual, there will be no more sense and no more Christianity. So important it is. The movie, released in 1960 with Richard Widmark, Lawrence Harvey, Richard Boone, Frankie Avalon, Pat Wayne, his son, Linda Crystal, music of Dmitry Tiomkin. The original length was 199 minutes, but reduced to 161. We will hear now and see the trailer of that magnificent movie.
It's here at last, the monumental history-making motion picture, 14 years in the making, the $12 million epic, The ALAMO. John Wayne as Colonel David Crockett. He's still on his feet. Oh, no. Oh, yes. Oh, yes, and it's my turn. Thanks, friend. If you don't insist on having them to yourself, I'll give you a hand. Pleasure, friend. You must be Jim Bowie. Oh, excuse me. Jim Bowie, Lawrence Harvey as Colonel William Travis. And guest star Richard Boone as Sam Houston.
Where's Jim Bowie?
He's indisposed, sir.
Indisposed? By God, if you mean drunk, you say drunk, sir.
He's drunk, sir.
Frankie Avalon as Smitty, youngest of the Alamo defenders.
All you need is a little Dr. Beekeeper fixin'.
See?
Davy, what's going to happen to us? I mean, to you and me.
I'm gonna tell you something, Flacca, and I want you to listen tight. When I come down here to Texas, I was looking for something. I didn't know what. There's right and there's wrong. You gotta do one or the other. You do the one and you're living. You do the other and you may be walking around, but you're dead as a beaver hat.
All occupants of the mission will leave at once. If this order is not followed with dispatch, there will be no quarter given.
I hate to say anything good about that long-winded jackanapes, but he does know the short way to start a war.
185 men fighting to their deaths against a horde of 7,000 in the most savage hand-to-hand combat in history. The Alamo, filling the giant theater screen with spectacular adventure, filmed on a scale unequaled in motion picture history, recreating the 13 glorious days of the siege history will never forget. And you will always remember the Alamo.
I cannot imagine that an American child, schoolboy, not being able to know the history of Alamo. And I can't believe the curriculum of the United States educational system does not have it in this part of their history for the country. There are parallelism with my own race and my own country, the messages and ethical messages that this movie brings around. All people, defenders, died in Alamo. In 490, before Apollonios of Tyana, the Battle of Marathon took place. 10,000 Athenians and Plataeans fought 300,000 Persians. 10,000 Persians lie dead, and only 194 Hellenes, Greeks. Same thing happened 10 years later in the Thermopylae, which from here I can go out of my balcony, and it lies to the east from here, and just it's straight on my eyesight. 300 Spartans, the personal guards of King Leonidas, and 1,000 Thespians fought for 3 days. In Alamo they lasted 13 days, but in Thermopylae treachery came around. The renowned, infamous Ephialtes, who was his home, it is today my own home, where I'm living, Trachis. He came from the same place. right here where I stand. And so we have another development. Today is January 14, 2021, and 2 days ago President Donald J. Trump went to Texas in the border with Mexico to inspect the wall he's rising up across the border with Mexico to check it, and he was pretty close to ALAMO. This is a very good coincidence, which today I make this video because of his visit. So we join all these happenings together, and we're producing that beautiful video to the history of this good nation. It's not a nation, good country. It's not a unified nation of one race and one language. They don't have the same customs, right? They are comprised of all countries in the world and nations of the world. Therefore, each one has their own language, mother language, and customs. So this is a polyethnic, how you call it, poly-society country. We hear Donald Trump, what he says.
Then I realized that's a long time. That's a big walk. A lot of the wall you have is incredibly natural. You have the mountains, you have the rivers, you have some very powerful water areas, you have some areas that are virtually impossible to get by, so we didn't need walls everywhere, but where we needed them, because it's been so successful that we've added nearly 300 miles, and that's currently under construction. This was our original wish, to get these areas done where there was such trouble. And now we have it, it's either in construction or pre-construction, an additional 300 miles. In every region that we've built the wall, illegal crossings and drug smuggling have plummeted, absolutely plummeted. In the Rio Grande Valley, crossings have dropped nearly 80%. In Yuma, Arizona, illegal entries have been slashed by 90%. Nationwide, ICE and Border Patrol have seized over 2 million pounds of fentanyl, heroin, meth, and other deadly narcotics, saving thousands and thousands of lives. We've arrested nearly 500,000 illegal aliens with criminal records, some with very serious criminal records of the type you don't want to know about, like murder. We removed nearly 20,000 gang members from the United States, including 4,500 members of MS-13, probably the worst gang of them all. Through the landmark reforms we've put into place, we have ended the immigration chaos and reestablished American sovereignty. Our most important reform was ending catch and release. Not easy to do. Dealing with Congress, it's very, very difficult, which is the functional equivalent of open borders, but even worse. It's catch and release them. It means release into our country, not into another country. This policy was exploited by vicious criminal organizations who understood the laws better than our people understood them for years, to spread misery and suffering and drugs all across the hemisphere. Now, instead of catch and release, we have detain and remove. It's called detain and remove. Doesn't that sound better? One of the biggest loopholes we closed was asylum fraud. Under the old broken system, if you merely requested asylum, you were released into the country. The most ridiculous thing anyone's ever seen. And we were taking in some people that you didn't want to have in your country. We instituted a series of historic policy changes to shut down asylum fraud, and that's what we did. This includes the groundbreaking agreement with Mexico known as the Migrant Protection Protocols, or MPP. Under this agreement, if an illegal alien requests asylum, they have to wait in Mexico until their case is heard. They used to wait here, and when they were waiting, they would say bye-bye, and they'd disappear somewhere into our country, and essentially would never find them again, would never see them again. This one measure alone ended a humanitarian crisis and saved countless lives, and especially, I have to say, lives from crime. I want to thank the great president of Mexico. He is a great gentleman, a friend of mine, and President Obrador. He is a man who really knows what's happening, and he loves his country, and he also loves the United States. But I want to thank for his friendship and his professional working relationship. We actually had 27,000 Mexican soldiers guarding our borders over the last 2 years. Nobody thought that was possible. And they made it very, very difficult, and that's why the numbers were able to plunge even during the construction of the wall. To our country through the southern border than it was through airports or any other means. So they'd land in South America and they'd work their way up and they'd come into our country. And these are not people from the countries that you would suspect. These are people from some very seriously dangerous places in the Middle East. And the numbers are far greater than anybody would understand, really far greater. Removing any of these measures would hamstring our workers, endanger our country, and cost taxpayers hundreds of billions of dollars a year. No matter our party, we should all agree on the need to protect our workers, our families, and our citizens of all backgrounds, no matter who they are. In particular, if our border security measures are reversed, it will trigger a tidal wave of illegal immigration, a wave like you've never seen before. And I can tell you that already waves are starting to come up from 2,000 and 1,000 and 500 miles away. We see what's coming. And they're coming because they think that it's gravy train at the end. It's going to be a gravy train. Change the name from the caravans, which I think we came up with, to the gravy train, because that's what they're looking for the gravy. This will be an unmitigated calamity for national security, public safety, and public health. It would destroy millions and millions of jobs and claim thousands of innocent lives. The policies I put into place are uniformly and strongly supported by the men and women of ICE and Border Patrol. We worked on them together, just like we did on the wall. We worked on the policies together, because nobody knows this whole world better than the incredible people right in front of me. To terminate those policies is knowingly to put America in really serious danger and to override the great career experts that have worked so hard, those from DHS. At this very moment, smugglers and coyotes are preparing to surge the border if our policies are loosened or removed. I mean, they're literally waiting, big groups of people, some of them very unsavory, I might add. This is an entirely preventable tragedy. It's waiting to happen. The safety of our nation must come before politics. We have many disagreements in the country, but we should all agree the urgent need to secure our borders, protect our homeland, and allow law enforcement to fulfill its mission without political interference. ICE and Border Patrol agents swore a sacred oath to uphold the law, and no political appointee should ever order them to violate that oath. These are real experts. They really get it. And I'll tell you who else gets it. The Hispanic population of our country gets it. Because not only did I win Texas in historic numbers, but I won border towns, which are largely Hispanic. And people were amazed to see that. And the numbers, they say, were Governor of Texas called, Greg, great guy, great governor called. He said, you had numbers that nobody's had since Reconstruction. Reconstruction means Civil War, and largely Hispanic. They understand it better than anybody, and they want law enforcement to help them live safe lives. The law that Congress passed must be upheld. To the men and women of ICE, Customs and Border Protection, and all across DHS, law enforcement in general, you have earned the everlasting gratitude of our nation. You have no idea.
President Trump, in his tenure of his presidency, he inspired the rising of patriotism in the country. 74+ million people voted for him in the last countrywide elections on November 3rd, 2020. The country is going through domestic upheavals, which is political generated. We wish them to sort them out and go back to peace and prosperity. Here in Greece, there is a body of digital warriors who following the sense of justice, and they take a war, taking a fight on, and they're taking aside the situation in the United States of America. People I could mention just for the history who are quite honest on this issue. Her name is Teris, Spartan Agogi, means Spartan education, and Andreas Tournavitis from the legendary Thebes, the home, the birthplace of Heracles, of Dionysus, of Pindar, the major lyric poet. And so many heroes, we can see them in the place of the tragedian plays, Electra, Antigone, 7 against Thieves, Oedipus, Tyrant, plays which all over the world are taught in schools and universities. We sent all these people, they control positive thoughts and send them overseas across the Atlantic, believing that vibrations of positive thinking can influence people across the land, across the oceans. Americans should go and visit Nashville, where they built a magnificent replica of the Parthenon, and the statue of Athena stands there, and go and ask help from her. She's the goddess of wisdom and the goddess of justifiable war, because you cannot earn your freedom if you're not prepared for war. And this goddess, the beloved child of Zeus, sprung out of his head. She's there, and as a respect and as a gesture of appreciation for what they did, Americans, in her honor, she can help the Americans find their peace.